thanks very much for joining us for this final session of the day. It's been a really interesting day. This is the first time we've done it, certainly the first time I've been involved in it. And so we're going to play a little bit by ear. I should first of all introduce you to the panel members. I'm the chair of the panel, and tell you a little bit about the format. So we have 4 panel members. So we have Paolo Creminelli from the ICTP in Trieste. We have Rachel Rosen from Colombia, and Riccardo Penco from Carnegie Mellon, and then my own colleague Antonio Padilla from Nottingham. And we're going to try and touch on things that have been discussed today, but the idea is to get you all involved. So there's going to be plenty of time, hopefully, for you to add your own thoughts to the discussion. We basically have, over the last few days, come up with like 3 topics to cover. Whether or not we will cover them, I don't know, but we'll make a good start anyway. And the idea is there's going to be, so the basic 4 topics, can't count already. One is the cosmological constant problem. Why on earth are we having this meeting in the first place? Why don't we do what many of the astronomers simply do and say, everything's consistent with the cosmological constant, which it is, and it's just another parameter. Live with it, guys. So why worry about it? Tony Padilla will lead on that, and then everyone, all the other panel members will join in after he's had his session. The second area is going to be linking to both an earlier talk today and then Claudia's talk tomorrow, Lavina's talk today, sort of the role of massive gravity in modified gravity. Where does it currently stand in terms of its contribution to late universe cosmology? What are the leading approaches we have to develop a consistent UV complete theory? And it opens up all sort of possible issues about treating gravity as an effective field theory, and what are the best ways to do that. Hopefully that will lead to quite a bit of spark, also quite a bit of discussion, as will Tony's piece, and Rachel will be leading on that. And the third area will be the general area of effective field theories in this subject, use of effective field theories versus Lagrangian approaches. And where should we be? Where should we be? Where are the conditions that, what are the limitations of using an effective field theory? I thought in Filippo's talk today, he was very articulate in describing, these very tight constraints that can emerge in an effective field theory description, but actually the effective field theory itself might not be valid in some of those regimes. And so you have to be careful how where you treat the effective field theory, and as opposed to just taking an action like the Horndeski action, which we've all got to know and love, and where we've just used it because it has certain symmetries present in the equations of motion, but who's to say those are the the right things to be looking for. So this whole area of effective field theory will be led by Paolo. And then the final area, hopefully we'll have time to discuss, is the links through to using data to analyze these models. Something which Lam was talking about, Filippo was talking about earlier, and how subject has been transformed through gravitational waves. This amazing observation, right? The direct detection of gravitational waves and the impact it's had on our subject immediately. The day that it was announced, 5 papers appeared. I've got a little warning saying my internet connection is unstable. I hope it hangs in there. So we'll be discussing that, and maybe if we get a chance, discuss little aspects like the Hubble tension. Does modified gravity and dark energy have anything to say about the Hubble tension, which could be relevant? So later on in the week, I know there's going to be a discussion session where, for example, George Efstathiou is involved in it, and there they'll definitely be discussing aspects of like large-scale structure and CMB and how it impacts on some of these models. So this will be this area, which could also include, of course, approaches to dark matter, which links very well in with Lam's final talk today, is going to be led by Riccardo. Okay, so the idea is that each speaker has about 2 to 3 minutes. If all 4 decide to speak on a particular topic, that could be about 10 minutes or so. And then once they've finished, I'll open it up to everybody, and we'll have 10 to 15 minutes of hopefully lively, interesting discussions where you disagree or agree or bring your own point of view. I would urge you to raise your hands, not to simply unmute. If you can unmute, I don't know if you can. Simply raise your hands, and then hopefully Enrico or David or myself will spot you, and we'll call you in, and you can say your piece. You can then unmute and say your piece, and then we'll carry on. And when a subject looks like it's been discussed, we'll move on to the second area. Okay, is that hopefully that's clear? Is that okay, Enrico? You think that's fairly clear for people? Okay, so let me begin. Let me welcome Tony Padilla, so he can take over. And Tony, 2 or 3 minutes or so, if you can.
It's going down.
Tell us everything we have.
There's 4 in the email.
Constant. Yeah. Okay, go for 4.
Can you see me, Ed? Because I can't see myself. So I don't know. I don't know why. Okay, I'm not going to.
That sort of sums up the
you are in the dark.
Yeah, I don't know. Just imagine this surreal voice in the background. I don't know why the camera's not working. Okay, so yeah, dark energy. So it certainly looks like a vacuum engine. It certainly talks like a vacuum energy. So the question is it actually a vacuum energy? And I think the problem that many of us from the theory side have with that, I guess you all know, as Ed mentioned, the cosmological constant problem, is that the observed value for the dark energy density is around 1 milli-electron volt to the 4th power. Whereas if you assume it's vacuum energy and you ask what is the expected value of from quantum field theory for vacuum energy, you're looking at something which is more like sort of a TV to the 4th power, or even higher, depending on where you imagine the cutoff of your theory. So the way you normally resolve that, that's a mismatch of 1 part in 10 to the 60 or more. And the way to sort of normally resolve that is you would say, well, I'm just going to add a counter term or bare vacuum energy that can cancel off that large value. But that's of course a balancing act that you need to do, again, 1 part in 10 to the 60. And then that's really quite unsettling. And the reason it's really unsettling is because this is a balancing act that's going on in the sort of the deep UV of the theory. And it really is, sort of betraying a real sensitivity to what's going on in the sort of most ultraviolet sector of the theory. If you were to sort of slightly tweak, the UV sector of the theory, maybe sort of tweak the mass of one of the heavy particles by say 1% or some tiny amount, it would completely destroy this balancing act. And so when you looked at the low energy observables, like the low energy cosmological constant, you wouldn't get the value you wanted. You'd have to redo that balancing act in the UV again. And this isn't how we like to think about physics. One of the nice things about physics is that we don't really need to know all the details of the UV theory in great depth. Okay, we can get away with not knowing that. And this seems to be one aspect in which that's not happening. And we should contrast this with, say, for example, something like the electron mass, which is also UV sensitive, but where the running is much more sort of, it's not so crazy. It's just a logarithmic running with the cutoff. And that's a much more gentle situation. That's what we would call a natural scenario. And I think a lot of people can sometimes dismiss naturalists as a sort of, to some extent, it's an aesthetic property of a theory, but I don't think we should. And the reason is there's so many examples in physics where naturalness has really worked. We can sort of list some of them here. So for example, whenever you see a small parameter, there seems to be an explanation. So for example, the electron mass is a lot smaller than the electroweak scale. Why? We know why. And it's because of the chiral symmetry in the limit where the mass of the electron goes to 0. The photon mass is much less than the electron mass, even though the two objects are coupled. And that's due to gauge symmetry. The pion mass is an order of magnitude less than a neutron mass. Why? Because the pion is the Goldstone boson of a broken chiral symmetry. There are loads of examples of naturalness really working in physics. And so we shouldn't be too quick to abandon it. So, I'm running out of time. So a quick word on solutions, how you might go about solving this problem. And I think there's sort of two angles you can take. You can look at it from the particle physics perspective, the quantum field theory perspective, or you can look at it from the gravity side. On the particle physics side, you may want to cook up some symmetry that can explain why the cosmological constant is so small. Something like supersymmetry would work in principle, but of course the problem, because you get this nice cancellation between bosons and fermions, but of course in nature, the supersymmetry is clearly broken above a TeV scale, so it just doesn't work for us. Alternatively, you may take the view that gravity, we can play around with gravity. You might say, well, I'll accept that the vacuum energy is large, but for some reason it doesn't gravitate. So this leads you down the path of self-tuning models, things like that. But there, you've always got to worry about things like Weinberg's famous no-go theorem. You've got to worry about passing solar system tests of gravity. You can often run into problems with violations of unitarity. There'll be dragons as you start doing that. My own personal favorite at the moment is to start thinking about global modifications of gravity and things like the sequestering proposal, which were inspired by some ideas in the 1980s by Sidney Coleman. But and of course, the last thing is where you do abandon the idea of naturalness, at least in this context, and you resort to sort of anthropic ideas. So I think there's quite an awful lot of people, everybody has their favorite thing, and I think I'll leave it there and open up the discussion to everyone else.
Okay, thanks very much, Tony. So if I just go down the names of the other panelists, and you can just say if you would like to say something for the next few minutes on this. Paolo, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Bah, I mean, I'm much more in favor of the cosmological constant. Well, what should I say? I mean, I find very distressing is that all the models that we study do not say anything about the solution of the problem Tony was explaining. So this is a big thing. On the other hand, I mean, I still think that studying deviations is an interesting exercise. I think we understand things trying to modify as much as possible. For instance, I don't think we think that black holes are not described by the Kerr geometry, but I think we think that it's very useful to try to check as much as possible this geometry. So even for the cosmological constant, it could be a similar exercise. And of course, if you want to study, you need to parameterize possible deviations. So yeah, so I'm on the side of cosmological constant. On the other hand, I would say that if we were living during inflation, we would see a universe which is similar to ours, which is accelerating, but then at the end is not a cosmological constant. So yeah, so I don't know. So I leave to the next.
Okay, so you've decided not to solve it quite today, but I'm sure. Rachel, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much to add. Just to second what Paolo said, a cosmological constant seems the most sort of natural answer or intuitive answer. I think, more broadly, maybe one thing that wasn't mentioned is issues of the quantum stability of de Sitter spacetime is interesting. There are all sorts of various arguments as to why if you live in de Sitter spacetime and add, quantum effects, that it may not actually be stable. Whether or not this actually has anything to do with the cosmological constant problem is not obvious, but I don't know. I think it's something fun to think about as well.
Okay.
Can I comment on that, Ed?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, yes. So I think this argument about de Sitter space, I mean, it's obviously there are issues with the people have worried about in this respect, but in terms of actually addressing the problem of the quantum stability of the vacuum, in the sense that the cosmological constant problem, I'm not sure it helps, because you could always go to a sort of locally Lorentzian frame wherever you basically sort of it's locally Minkowski space to some extent. I mean, once you're well inside the Hubble horizon. And then you've got your sort of bog standard cosmological constant problem that you always had, right? Where you start looking at the vacuum energy corrections and so on. So I don't see how sort of just saying I'm in de Sitter and maybe de Sitter's unstable is going to necessarily help. I think where it is interesting that it can maybe sort of be part of the story is in the context of the swampland and sort of anthropic explanations of the cosmological constant. I mean, one of the things that the anthropic arguments require is that you do have the sort of de Sitter solutions with low vacuum energy, and at the moment string theory seems to be arguing that those don't exist. So well, perhaps. I mean, we don't know yet, but that's certainly one conjecture. So I think yeah, that's what I feel about that.
So I think you may have raised a point there that might get a few people discussing with the swampland conjectures. I don't think I've managed to ask Riccardo. Do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, maybe a couple of points I could add is, I mean, my personal perspective, I think the cosmological constant problem is really the naturalness problem, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of its urgency. And maybe something that is worth emphasizing is that it's a problem that one would already have even in a theory, in an effective theory, where all particles but electrons and neutrinos have been integrated out. And so it's a problem that already manifests itself at relatively low energies. And my perspective is that, which I think agrees with what the other panelists have expressed, is that this problem is probably telling us that we don't understand something about field theory as well as we should, rather than we don't understand something about cosmology. But maybe that's a controversial view, and hopefully it is, so it will spark some discussions.
So why do you say that, Riccardo? Why are you leaning on the field theory explanation side rather than maybe a gravity one?
Well, simply because, of course, it's you know, it becomes an observational problem once you couple the theory to gravity, but in principle, it's a fine-tuning problem that you would have even in the absence of gravity. So from that perspective, I think yeah, it might very well be that we don't understand something about field theory rather than there being some degrees of freedom that we're missing. But like I said, it's a biased viewpoint.
I think it's probably worth at this point opening this discussion wider now to all the participants. I noticed Fernando, I think if I'm understanding this right, Fernando, you've got your hand up. So yeah. Feel free to join in here. Hi.
Very good. Okay, hello. Well, very nice discussion so far. Thank you. So I just like to totally disagree with the comment of Tony about the string theory is telling you there is no de Sitter. You know, there's some conjectures. A conjecture means a conjecture is not a proof of anything. And so, sure. and these conjectures are not strong enough to say anything about de Sitter. So I think it's totally wrong to say string theory is against de Sitter. So I think.
I don't think I quite said that, Fernando. I think I said if the conjectures were true, well, we can watch the recording. But if the conjectures were true, then we can then it would be problems for anthropic arguments.
Yes, I know you are as passionate to the cosmological constant problem as you are for Liverpool. So I just wanted to make the case. But in any case, I mean, I don't want the discussion to go in that direction because tomorrow in the panel discussion we will have that being discussed. So I think probably we should go to another direction.
So just so I'm sure you're saying tomorrow. I mean, is this a session with Cliff chairing it? There's going to be discussion on string theory and yes. Cosmological constant and late time solutions there.
Yeah, just the swampland.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I see Gia.
Can I just back up my point there? So my point was not that to say whether the de Sitter conjecture, whether it was valid or not. I mean, that's a question for the string theorists and tomorrow. But if it's true, then it does weaken the anthropic arguments from string theory for the cosmological constant problem. And I think that's fair.
Gia, hi.
So, hi. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Hi. No, I just got provoked by this discussion a little bit. Yeah. I disagree with Fernando. Probably I Okay, I disagree with Fernando completely, and maybe I will correct a little bit what others said. I claim that if there is anything that we understand in string theory extremely well, is that string theory cannot have a de Sitter vacuum. Now, if tomorrow someone invents a new string theory, which is not based on S-matrix description, then we can talk tomorrow, okay? But today, the only formulation of quantum gravity that we have is S-matrix description. And S-matrix cannot, I had a paper recently showing, I think pretty convincingly, and by using double scaling arguments. And actually you can prove that the only way to make de Sitter as a vacuum is to decouple closed strings and to decouple quantum gravity. So therefore, I don't know on which Fernando is basing his statement that string theory has, I mean, de Sitter vacuum. I mean, all the evidence is against it, and simply, I mean, I think we have to change the point of view, and instead of thinking of for a very long time, we were thinking about de Sitter cosmological constant as a naturalness story, but my point is that we have to change the point of view and promote it into a consistency story. It's like anomaly cancellation. I mean, we're not saying the hypercharges of the standard model particles are what they are. We're not saying they are unnatural, because anomaly cancellation fixes them. And de Sitter is exactly like that in string theory. That's what I claim. And this is not a conjecture. So I want to make it very clear that this is fully based on evidence of what we know in string theory. Okay.
Great. Okay.
And quantum gravity. Yeah.
I see Cliff has also now put his hand up. Go on for it, Cliff.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
I was actually going to be boring in the sense that all I wanted to do was to clarify what tomorrow's discussion will be. And in particular, it won't be specifically about string theory. I'm afraid that everybody who's not interested in string theory is going to then decouple. It's more aimed at the swampland, and is there anything, and the extent to which the UV physics can inform low energy physics. That's kind of the topic of tomorrow's thing.
Great. Thanks for that, Cliff. Enrico, are you telling me off, or are you going to ask a question or make a comment?
No, I was just contributing to the discussion.
Okay, then you're welcome.
That's okay. No, I was trying to get back to Gia's point and understand how to, because I can see where Fernando is coming from. If we believe in that we understand effective field theories, we can write down what we expect the low energy effective field theory is for string theory, perhaps using supersymmetries, and then the rules are that once you have an effective field theories, you're allowed to use that to find solutions. And by doing that, you can look for solutions in this string theory landscape of possibilities. So perhaps I'm saying what I'm trying to ask Gia to understand his point of view. If it is true that string theory indicates that there is no de Sitter, there is some logical fallacy, some mistake that we do when we write down an effective field theory for string theory, and then we try to look for the solutions, because it's not so hard to conceive that just perturbative corrections will generate the de Sitter vacuum. It's hard to believe that this will not, and I think perhaps that's also where...
Yeah, that's no, that's exactly the point. What I was trying to say is that, I mean, first of all, when we're talking about the problem, we can only talk about problem within a framework. We cannot talk about the problem in some abstract sense. Now, when I'm talking about issue of de Sitter, I'm talking within string theory and within effective field theory quantum gravity. So these are the only frameworks that I know that work, and so therefore. Now, regarding de Sitter model building in string theory, this actually started the modern technology, which is based on uplifting by using D-branes. That started by Henry Tai and myself. We initiated this idea that to produce de Sitter in string theory by using D-brane tension. And all the constructions that I'm aware of, they are using the same ingredients. So you use D-brane tension and correspondingly fluxes, because D-brane is also coupled to fluxes. And we tried many cases, and every time I would see, my personal experience was that it looked like plausible assumptions about Keller function that you would make. You would say, oh, if I assume this about Keller, after all, it looks natural, it looks not so bad. There may be a local minimum, but it never works. So once you dig it deeper, you think that this assumption is reasonable, but once you dig it deeper, you see that it doesn't work. Now, when you face problems like this, it's very hard to start disproving on case-by-case basis. Because tomorrow someone comes and tells you, oh, now I have this extra D-brain, I put on top of it, I compactify in this way or that way. And every time you have to go through entire construction before you discover a mistake. And usually you do discover a mistake. It's usually either Keller is in strong coupling, or there is some assumption made which was not justified, and so on. But when this happens, usually there is an underlying reason for it, okay? And that's my point. My point is that the reason we cannot get reliable de Sitter construction in string theory, because there is a good reason for it, because de Sitter is string theory is an S matrix theory. And so that's the underlying reason for it, period. And otherwise it would be really strange that you have a theory which is based on S matrix formulation. And that theory all of a sudden produces a state, a vacuum, in which you cannot define S matrix. That would make very little sense. And that's exactly why this is not happening. So that's my point. My point is that there is a generic reason, and this has nothing to do with swampland conjecture or anything like that. This is built in string theory through the S matrix, foundation, through the S matrix definition. So that's my point.
Here's what we're going to do. Fernando's come back. I'm going to let Fernando have his say, and then we're moving on. And for round 2 of this, we go for tomorrow. But Fernando, go for it.
Sorry, I couldn't say. Yes, I totally agree with Guille in the sense that the de Sitter is properly as a stable quantum vacuum does not appear to exist, but a natural thing to have is that what all this construction like KKLT and so on, you have metastable vacua, and that you can see as a we are usually we are used to things like resonances and so on. So, as a formal question, which I fully agree, that there's an issue about how to define asymptotic states and so on, because it's not this is not a asymptotically flat space. But that's not the point about all these constructions. It's just having as a metastable. But I stop here, and when this continue tomorrow.
Okay, except Eva's now just joined in.
Is really a small, tiny comment, because because this is very important, because I think this is precisely a little bit a mistake that we are usually making.
Okay. We
think that if the Sitter is metastable, then it's okay from the point of view S matrix, and that's not true, because for the definition of the S matrix, as Fernando himself said, you need a global defined time. And if you have a metastable de Sitter, is equally bad. So any metastable de Sitter is equally problematic for defining the S matrix. Actually, any eternally inflating universe is equally problematic for defining the S matrix. And so this is very important, that the metastability is not saving us. Sorry.
Eva, do you want to say something, or do you just want people to go and read the chat? I'm not going to read it out, so people go and read the. Eva's written.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably no secret what I think, but I did not find the statements about the so-called swampland at all compelling. The models, first of all, are not all of the kind that Gia described. Some of them are explicit. You can go and get your hands on them, and involve the kind of balance of forces that he quickly dismissed. So I have a little bit in the chat about that.
Yeah.
The counter arguments were not comprehensive or accurate, and we can discuss that in great detail. And in fact, we shouldn't just make claims, sweeping claims, denying all of these examples. And when it comes to what the framework is, that's a great question, and it's not fully understood, but it's far from just S matrix theory. So there is a lot of progress on de Sitter holography lately, especially. By building up from developments in the TT bar deformation, which comes now with explicit entropy calculations that provide concrete cross checks of this framework. So, there's traction on this problem, and it's really crucial to say it's not just a perturbative S matrix theory. Just because some of the earliest calculations in string theory involved a perturbative S matrix set of calculations does not mean that the total framework for the theory is just that. Not at all. So I think the arguments surrounding these so-called swampland are really full of logical fallacies, do not address the existing literature in any kind of comprehensive or accurate way, and should not be, it's sort of like internet memes that get propagated without justification. I think we could still use this term swampland for these things, because I've never understood it. I mean, swamps actually exist, right? They're kind of murky, they're kind of messy, but they do exist. So if you want to use that term, it's perfectly good. But I think the kind of term that actually Tony started us off with, the UV sensitivity or dangerous irrelevance, is the right idea, where we actually carefully look at where it is that the UV physics matters and where it doesn't. And that's a standard part of our early universe theory, where we ask about the UV sensitivity of inflation and so on. So I did elaborate on these things in the chat, and feel free to read about it.
Okay, I'm going to, that's only taken half an hour, and Boris Johnson's speaking to the nation at 8 o'clock, probably to tell us we've all going to have our doors locked. So we've got till 8 o'clock. So
it's a Liverpool match as well, then. So
and it's a Liverpool match, more important. So that's a great start, I think. And I think there'll be more on that tomorrow. If it's okay with everyone, we'll move on to the second question, which is, in many ways equally interesting and provocative, and that is, does the graviton have a mass? And if so, what role is it playing in the late time universe? So I'd like to welcome Rachel to start that side of the discussion.
Yeah, so my apologies. I'm actually not going to talk about massive gravity. I'm going to about a bit of a broader umbrella topic,
sure.
Which came up in our discussion about theories, about cosmological theories that have low UV cutoffs. And so the question arose when we were discussing that frequently what happens when you add new degrees of freedom that are relevant for cosmology, what you end up with is a theory that has a very low UV cutoff. And so this raises various issues both on the phenomenological side and I think on the more formal side as well. So, one of the questions I just want to pose is does this pose a particular problem phenomenologically? Should we be concerned when we have a theory that has such a low cutoff? And I think an important part of this discussion is also discussing screening mechanisms as well, and the effect that screening mechanisms can have if you do have a theory with a low cutoff. Assuming that there are no issues phenomenologically, I think from the more formal side, we generally would have an obligation to find or rule out UV completions or UV extensions of theories that do have low cutoffs, with the assumption, of course, that if you have a theory with a low cutoff, that whatever new physics enters at higher energies should probably be working in the direction of restoring the predictions of general relativity at higher energies in order to be consistent with observations. But I think it is important to disambiguate the difference between a UV completion and a UV extension. So assuming that we have things like unitary Lorentz invariant UV completions, we know that there are very strong bounds that we can put on low energy effective theories. On the other hand, you can also ask the question, well, what if I don't need a fully UV complete theory? What if I just want to know, is there some way that I can add new degrees of freedom to raise the cutoff of my effective theory? And then there are different methods that we can employ to try and answer this question as well. So in fact, you can kind of brute force the Higgs mechanism this way. If I start out with a theory of a massive spin 1 particle, you can ask, what new degrees of freedom can I add just to raise the cutoff of this theory? And in fact, derive the Higgs mechanism this way. So this is another way that we could think about sort of UV extending these low energy theories that we have. But one issue also that arises is that, whenever we talk about UV completions or UV extensions or even defining UV cutoffs, we're almost always using methods that assume that we're in flat space-time. So I think it's an important question to ask. How can we generalize these methods, these constraints, for curved backgrounds or for de Sitter space-time in particular? So things like analyticity constraints, the absence of a time advance when you talk about iconal scattering, or various S-matrix techniques that we can use to UV extend theories. We're always assuming flat asymptotics here, and we should ask for cosmological theories, for theories in de Sitter space-time. Are there analogous techniques or analogous constraints that we can use? And since I don't have much time, just sort of a final point is that a related issue is the issue of superluminality in low energy theories. This is very much tied to these issues of UV completion and UV extension. And so I think it's also an important open question. How do we talk about superluminality in theories with de Sitter asymptotics? So maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, plenty of questions. Thank you very much, Rachel. As before, let me just go through the other members of the panel and see if they want to add anything. Paolo?
Yes, regarding what Rachel is saying, one point in which I'm not aware of much progress is how to use these S-matrix constraints in theories in which Lorentz invariance is spontaneously broken. And this would be important because, for instance, many times we have many constraints on just to be concrete, we have many constraints on Galilean theories, but these are based on calculations around a trivial background, phi dot equal to 0. But usually we're interested actually in different theories in which you expand about around the time-dependent background. And this is something that would be important both for inflation and for dark energy. So this adds, if you want, is another layer of complication to what Rachel is saying about going to curved space. And also another thing that I also agree with Rachel is sometimes we say that the Weinstein mechanism and in general nonlinearities may be useful to raise the UV cutoff, but this is based on, as far as I understand, okay, there is some rough argument, but also on this I didn't see much progress, so it's not completely clear to me if this can work or not. So these are two directions in which I think some progress would be useful.
Thanks very much, Paolo. Riccardo?
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add on this, so maybe in the interest of time, I'll
sure. Tony?
Yeah, so I've got my picture working.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do have, I share a lot of Rachel's concerns here. So the issue of low cutoffs, it does worry me because it's kind of really necessary in some sense. It's been linked to sort of perhaps using things like the Weinstein mechanism. Actually having a working Weinstein mechanism is automatically tied into having a low cutoff and strong coupling in the theory. And that is a worry because if you've got a breakdown of perturbative unitarity, then you expect that there is going to be some new physics come in, or if there isn't, then what's going on? Like, why not? What's really happening? So if you assume that there's some new physics coming in, then what does that physics do, and how does that affect phenomenology, right? So you have a theory which maybe breaks down at 1,000-kilometer scale, and which is a very much an observable scale when it comes to gravity, and yet you're basically asking us just to trust it. Well, we don't know what it is. We don't even know what the theory is at those shorter distances, and yet we can probe it experimentally. So it feels like we really ought to try. We really ought to be a focus to try to sort of improve the UV sector of some of these theories and try to understand what actually is really happening. Of course, people have thought about these things. It's not something that people haven't done. But I think before we start using things like Weinstein mechanism and throwing all our trust into them, when it's linked to this problem of strong coupling, I think we have to understand a bit better what happens beyond that cutoff and what can.
Would this comment hold for other screening mechanisms as well?
I think potentially, yeah, because you're always pushing the theory non-linearly, and there's always it seems to be more pertinent in the case of Einstein.
Yeah,
I would say
it's more obvious there, but it could be true, say, for symmetrons or chameleons or anything like that. That's interesting. Okay, I'd like to open this up now. Enrico's hand appeared. Gia's hand is still there, but I don't know if that's from previously. Enrico,
sorry,
yours is new.
How do I put it down?
There you go. You've done it. Okay, Enrico.
Well, this is more of an outsider, so I haven't thought so much about this question, so I'm just going to phrase it in terms of a question. Just to understand better what we mean by low cutoffs, I guess we mean that we are a bit, by low, we mean low with respect to the scales at which we are used to probe gravities, like solar system stuff or me dropping apples. But still, it's like some more than 10 orders of magnitude to the Hubble scale. So some of this EFT of dark energy, for example, they have potential validities that are actually kind of huge. If I think of my poster child EFT being the chiral Lagrangian, that's maybe useful within 1 order of magnitude or 2 between the mass of the pi and the mass of the neutron, and then it's completely irrelevant at lower energies. So actually, in some sense, so I was wondering if by law we're saying that it's kind of annoying because it doesn't help us to connect the phenomenologies on cosmological scales with other phenomenologies, or whether there is some other aspect that has to do with some expectations about these cutoffs, or maybe within gravity. So maybe if you could, if it's everyone could elaborate on that point. And yeah, I don't fully understand how
Before I invite Cliff to say his bit, maybe Rachel, do you want to come back on what you mean by low cutoff scales?
No, sure. So by low, I just meant that the cutoff happens at scales where we know beyond which we can make gravitational observations and measurement, and so our EFT actually cuts off at a regime that's smaller from what we can observe. And so how do we just extend it to include gravitational observations that we know that that have already been made effectively?
Can I make a comment as well, Ed?
Sure, Tony.
Yeah, so I think when the theory is still in its linearized regime, of course, there's no issue. But when you're doing things like Weinstein mechanism, so when you start going within the Weinstein scale, so there's kind of 2 scales here. You've got the Weinstein radius, which is kind of associated with a particular source. But you've also got the strong coupling scale in the theory, and if the 2 are connected, and if you imagine that there are sort of higher order operators coming in suppressed by the strong coupling scale that you haven't written down in your theory, they can potentially affect the dynamics further out up to potentially, say the Weinstein radius or some scale in between. So it can actually be quite a macroscopic effect. But as long as you're in the linearized regime, then everything's fine. I don't think there's any issue. But there can be potential contamination the minute you want to start probing the higher order operators of the theory.
Yeah. How do you control?
Can you just say what is even meant by, this is my ignorance, by by cutoff when we are at strong coupling?
So, for example, so let's say I take some cubic Galilean operator or something like that, and then it's suppressed by some scale. That would be the strong coupling scale at which perturbative unitarity breaks down.
But perturbative unitarity is something about perturbation theory rather than a strong coupling. Is there strong coupling of what we mean by?
So if I consider to do scattering, then the amplitude sort of starts to get too big, essentially.
But the perturbative amplitude or the actual amplitude?
Sorry?
The perturbative amplitude does, but that just means that we are in the strong coupling regime.
Sure, exactly. So typically when perturbative, so I was saying, that's why I'm saying perturbative unitarity. Typically when that breaks down, new physics will come in, typically, if we have a Wilsonian completion of the theory. We want to remain at weak coupling.
Maybe I was confused about what Paolo was suggesting. So maybe in some sense, how can I discuss how to raise, so to do a UV extension, which is what Richard was proposing, when I actually know it is some strongly coupled dynamics responsible for that? Is that?
Sorry, maybe I was not clear. What I was referring to is that sometimes for instance, if you focus on the, say, the cubic Lilion, sometimes we take for granted that the Weinstein mechanism, so the fact that the theory become classically nonlinear, will help in raising the quantum mechanical cutoff. And this is based basically on the fact that it is true that the kinetic term of perturbations around a nonlinear solution will become large, and this may help to raise the cutoff. But what I'm saying is that this is an argument, but I don't know how much seriously you can take it. This is an argument to say that, for instance, you can raise the scale starting from lambda 3 to something which allows more or less to incorporate all the gravitational experiments. But again, this is an argument that I'm not sure if there is any explicit calculations. This is what I was referring to.
Yeah, I misunderstood. So the classical part is strongly interacting, but the quantum one is still perturbative. So we understand that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, that was very, very useful. So Cliff, do you want to, waiting patiently, do you want to say something?
I was just going to comment on the issue of low cutoffs in these various modifications to gravity. I don't think there's anything in principle problem with that. You know, there's low cutoffs and all kinds of uses of effective field theories, but I think it specifically becomes an issue only if you're motivating these theories as solutions to the cosmological constant problem, because there the issue is, are you doing better than the people who ignore the naturalness issue and just think of the vacuum energy as being what the dark energy is? And in those theories, you know, once you integrate out, if the world is a standard model coupled to gravity, and you integrate out the electron, and so you're any scale below the electron mass, then there's really not a cosmological constant problem anymore, because the largest mass in your problem could be the neutrino mass, and that's not a bad scale for the dark energy. And so the fact that you have these proposals that have cutoffs that are kind of much higher than the Hubble scale isn't necessarily telling us much until they're high enough that you can include a particle like the electron that would have been a problem if in the cosmological constant problem in the standard context. And so, but then once you ask for naturally small dark energy, that would be the absence of a UV completion that includes the electron makes it that you can't take the solution seriously until there's been something that you could have integrated out that would have given you the problem. So I see the issue as being specific to theories that are motivated as solutions to the original cosmological constant problem.
Well, you've motivated Gia to come back. Gia?
That's my job.
Yeah, thanks. No, actually, my point is related with the previous discussion. Just to, because I'm a little bit confused in general, when we're talking about UV completion, this simply means that we have certain degrees of freedom that we work with, and degrees of freedom are always weakly interacting in quantum field theory or in string theory. The UV completion means that these degrees of freedom at some point become strongly interacting, and we have to replace them. We have to integrate in some new stuff. Basically, we have to rediagonalize Hamiltonian in order to go to valid new degrees of freedom that are weakly interacting. And now there are only two possibilities. At least there are only two options that are logically that I can see logically. One is the standard Wilson, what we call Wilsonian UV completion, when we integrate in certain new degrees of freedom which are weakly interacting, and the theory continues. For example, in standard model, W's, longitudinal W's become strongly interacting. We integrate in Higgs particle, and Higgs particle restores unitarity. So it continues. And there is another idea which we call classicalization, which basically implies that UV complete theory in deep UV, without new degrees of freedom, but you instead with using old degrees of freedom, but high occupation number. So this soft stuff, basically. So for example, this is what happens in gravity. Irrespective of string theory or field theory, at very high center of mass energy, gravitational amplitudes, they are dominated by black holes. And black holes are soft stuff. So you start creating high occupation number multi-particle states. so these are the only options that I'm aware of, only 2 ideas. Maybe there is something else which we never thought about. That would be really, really interesting if there is some new possibility. But at the moment, and it's, yeah, it's a good question because with these theories like Galileo's, it looks like Wilsonian UV completion is not there, and so the question is whether they can be UV completed by classicalization, or by soft stuff, and it's not. I don't have a proof or anything, even for any toy model, but there is some evidence for some toy models. Yeah, that's all. I just wanted to make.
So it'd be an argument for classicalization over Wilsonian approaches.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Anybody else want to? I guess the hands appear and I get to see them, so there's no more hands appearing. Any of the panel want to say anything just to finish this off before we move on to the third topic? No? Okay, thanks very much, Rachel. So the third area we were going to discuss is the, well, this is all related, of course, is use of EFTs, the limiting powers of EFTs over, say, using standard actions to discuss theories, especially when we're considering late universe, so including dark energy, modified gravity. And to lead this discussion, Paolo, over to you.
Yes, it seems that I'm not allowed to share the screen. Okay, I had only a couple of slides to guide the eye, but I can also speak. But
I don't know how to do
that. If Enrico makes you a co-host, you can share.
I am co. Okay.
There you are.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm not going to say anything particularly deep, but as we saw also today, there are various approaches, and you can focus on specific theories with well-defined assumption. For instance, Sinji started with breaking time diffs, but keeping only 2 degrees of freedom, and you end up with a certain class of theories. Another approach is what Filippo, for instance, was talking about. Also, there you have to make some assumption, and you end up with a given EFT that describes fluctuations. And of course, this is the arena where you can study UV obstructions. Not everything goes. So, and there is a third approach that I think pragmatically may be the one that we should push more, which is just to find generic tests that based on certain assumptions, because this is also pragmatically at the end one has to also to face what the experiments can do. So let me a few comments about something that came to my mind listening to the talks. So one thing that I want to mention when we discuss EFTs is the issue of relative stability. Okay, I still think that despite the fact that I don't know what to do with the CC, I still think that the relative stability should be a guiding principle. And there are many things that, let me do a couple of examples in which this is relevant. For instance, usually many of these dark energy theories have some universal coupling of matter with the scalar field. And for instance, Lam and Alberto discussed many years ago the fact that this kind of coupling is stable under loops of matter, but is not stable when you include loops of the scalar itself, or when you include energy due to the gravitational field, that is to say, black holes. So these kind of arguments is very important to understand what, I mean, I cannot write everything and applying it. So this is particularly important because sometimes we write a theory and we apply it to macroscopic objects. It's not always the case that some assumption about the UV physics is also applicable to macroscopic objects. For instance, I don't know really what happens if you talk about these formal couplings or other forms. And so this is something. And another example of study of stability, relative stability, as was discussed by Filippo today, based on in this context of Ordensky theory. And I think that these arguments are very important. So at the very least, this is a principle to understand that, for instance, if I have a certain EFTs, what is relatively stable and what is not. Another point that was also mentioned by, that has to do with the Ordensky theories is also the fact that sometimes we focus on second order equation of motion. So we focus on Ordensky or beyond Ordensky theories. But again, loops will surely generate operators which are not giving second order equation of motion. And some of these operators are also relevant. For instance, Filippo was mentioning that they can give dispersion of gravitational waves. These are higher derivative operators, and they may be relevant for gravitational waves. So this is another direction in which, okay, we like to focus on Ordensky, but Ordensky is not relatively stable. So this is another example of relative stability. Another point is that I want to make, but it was already discussed actually in the panel, is this issue of different effective field theories on different scales. In Filippo's talk, he was mentioning about this possible change of the EFT, describing LIGO observations and describing cosmology. Of course, this is possible, but I think there is also, I mean, it would be nice to put a limit to our imagination, because at a certain point, you go into the limit in which there is one EFT for every possible experiment. Just to make it concrete, for instance, in this particular case, I don't think it's possible, or maybe it's very difficult to realize a system in which there is a very sudden variation of the speed of gravitational waves that is consistent with LIGO, with exquisite precision, but then it deviates substantially when you go to larger scales. But okay, it would be nice to understand if I have to live with different EFTs, how it's possible to, what are the constraints in going from one to the other. And finally, the last slide is about what I was saying before. I think pragmatically, it would be, at the end, I mean, we have to live with the experiments that we have, and it would be very nice to think about a set of tests which are not based on any theories, but just general tests. Of course, people already thought about this, but maybe we should think more. A typical test is the equivalence of the two Newtonian potentials. Another test that I find it very interesting has been discussed recently by Lam and collaborators, is the possibility of testing the equivalent principle on very large scales using consistency relations in the large scale structures. So this is a set of observables that has nothing to do with so it's just trying to test whether free fall of all possible galaxies follow the usual equivalent principle. And it would be nice, I think, to have more of this kind of tests, because eventually it will be the direct route to talking with the experimentalists. Okay, stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. So I'll just ask the other panel members if they would like to add something to this. So Rachel, I'll begin with you, if that's okay.
Sure. I think I'll just pass for the sake of time, though.
Okay, no problem. Riccardo?
Yeah, same here. Okay.
Tony?
Yeah, I'll say something. Yeah, I liked Paolo's comment about sort of Horndeski not really being enough. I mean, a lot of us, it's useful to play with Horndeski. It's a theory we can work with potentially, but this obsession with it perhaps goes a little too far. I think yes, it has second order field equations, but as we well know, quantum corrections are definitely going to generate higher order operators. It's not a UV complete theory, so we'd expect those higher order operators to be there. And so we shouldn't get too hung up on it. I think the need for second order field equations in that context. So I think it's worth bearing in mind. One possible avenue we might take is try to build up sort of the idea of an effective theory, sort of inspired by the kind of things they do in particle physics, you know, using things like naive dimensional analysis, where you sort of, you think about what kind of sort of approximate symmetries you've got, and you can build up the structure of the higher order operators, including the relevant factors of 2 pi, 4 pi, or whatever, and getting, you know, allowing naturalness to guide you to sort of to build up the theories in that way. But yeah, so that was just really the only comment I had, is that clinging very tightly to Horndeski and second order field equations, it doesn't feel necessarily as it's the best way forward.
Okay, so that is Paolo. You want to come back, or are you okay?
Okay.
You're okay. So I'll open it up. I don't see any hands up at the moment. So I see. Okay, I do now. Enrico, go for it.
So this was a quick. I try to understand how fast can you switch from one EFT to the next, in case you wanted. Isn't that somehow determined by the naive dimension, or the naive dimension of the most irrelevant operator, and how fast that can be overwhelmed by others? Is there some kind of Wilsonian RG way to approach that issue? Do you know if this is something that is perhaps better?
Not really. I mean, for instance, in the case of the speed of gravitational waves, I mean, one can think about what happens for electromagnetic waves in a medium, and usually one has the fact that you go back to the speed of light in vacuum quadratically in the frequency, so the corrections are of order omega squared over a typical scale. But I don't know whether, I mean, this was I was trying to say, it would be nice to, I didn't think about it, but it would be nice to have some general arguments, because I mean, to answer some there was a question in the chat. So what I was meaning is that we should not too much go in the direction of saying that okay, we have experiments at this given scale, we have experiments in the lab, we have experiments in the solar system, we have experiments at LIGO, we have experiments on cluster scales, we have experiments on cosmological scales, and in principle all these could be potentially different EFTs. But okay, this is a bit maybe too. It would be nice to know how fast you can switch. Yeah, but to be honest, I don't know the answer to this question. Whether.
But you suspect that there is a bound, or is going to be a bound set by taste?
Yeah, I don't. I think there must be a bound, but I didn't think about it.
Anybody else want to add anything here? So something in the discussions that the emails that we exchanged between ourselves before this, do any of you have a feel for the role that sort of the bootstrap mechanism that, you know, a number of people are pushing for to look at inflation, for example, how that could be used, or can it be used as an alternative approach to think about cosmology of the late universe?
I let Enrico answer.
Yeah, Enrico or David, the two co-hosts. This is your opportunity to sell your wares.
Well, I don't want to be negative. Maybe I have to think a little bit, but the way it's currently formulated is the first thing that you want to do is hang on the actual well-defined observables that are defined at conformal boundaries, so it's some infinity of sorta. And those are not things that we access in the late universe, as opposed to the early universe, in which you can think of primordial correlators to be a good proxy for what the value of correlators would be at the actual boundary of quasi-de Sitter. But in the late universe, that's not the kind of things we measure when we look at the clustering of dark matter, dark energy, or expansion history. So from that point of view, it's a bit it's a bit at odds with the same. Maybe to say it in other words, we're not even sure that there is even a well-defined observable that is not at the boundary when you have a quantum theory of gravity, even perturbatively. So while here you're obliged to measure things in the bulk because that's the only thing that we get to see. I mean, as opposed to a future civilization 100 Hubble times from now, when the universe stops accelerating and goes back to deceleration that can measure the cosmological correlators produce right now. So that's kind of the.
So you're just saying be patient.
Yeah, and fingers crossed that it switches back to deceleration.
Yeah. Well, we've just heard De Sitter's unstable, so it's going to do something. Okay, big argument going on there. So don't want to. We'll move on.
Can I just make one more?
Yeah,
comment?
sure, Tony, go for it.
So it connects back to something that Rachel said in her section, is that the extent to which when we started building up these effective theories that can describe maybe parameterize dark energy and whatnot, of course, and then there's the analyticity constraints that we can put in there as well. And in terms of the coefficients, maybe, and I know there's people thinking about sort of constraining those, and that can help build up the story as well, and give you. I think there's a lot that can come from theory to help consistently build up the kind of things that and then to dovetail that with what experiments looking for.
Certainly can add more constraints that have to be satisfied by some of these parameters that might otherwise be very free. Okay, anybody else want to add something before we move on to the final question that we have written down? Okay, so this one it's kind of bringing it all together in some sense. It's something that Lam made a big point of, and actually Filippo did as well, about the linking of the theories with data and the impact that the gravitational wave detections has had on the subject, and maybe will continue to have, both in terms of understanding the nature of dark energy, modified gravity, but also dark matter, which we haven't really said much about in the discussion so far this evening. So leading this discussion, I welcome Riccardo. So over to you, Riccardo.
Thank you, Ed. So I've also prepared just a couple of slides to guide the eye. So I won't go too much into data because I expect that's going to be the focus of the session on Thursday. But it seems to me that a very economical way of framing what many of us are after when studying dark energy models, or when studying dark matter models, we are ultimately interested in searching for new bosonic degrees of freedom that interact gravitationally with ordinary matter. And so the question is, now that we have this new way of probing the universe through gravitational waves, what can we learn about the potential existence of these new bosonic degrees of freedom? As Paolo mentioned, there are essentially two ways of going about this. You can take a concrete particular theory and try to derive its predictions for what can be observed at LIGO, or you can take a more try to take a more model independent approach. And I would say that a challenge for the first approach is that at least to me, that doesn't seem to be an analog, say, of supersymmetry pre-LHC, in the sense a single idea around which most of the community has coalesced. And so while concrete models are very helpful in are good, how should I say, playgrounds to learn about potentially interesting effects, in terms of comparing and trying to tease out these effects from data, I feel that an EFT approach is probably a more a broader approach to the problem. And so the strategy there is to start by assuming some degrees of freedom and some symmetries, and then run with it and see how much we can derive. And in this cartoon here, I've highlighted that there are three main components in the story of gravitational waves. If you want, there is the production mechanism with,
Riccardo, sorry, I cannot
with the binary.
See your slides. I'm not sure if.
Yeah, I don't think you've shared them yet.
Oh,
sorry. Yeah.
No, thank you, Paolo. Let's see.
Alternatively, you could just describe some of the equations on your blackboard.
Yeah. Let's see. How about now?
Yes.
Does it work?
Yeah.
You can see my pointer.
Parameterized approaches.
Right. So yeah, in this cartoon, I'm showing that there are three main parts of the story. There is the production part in the spiral, then the propagation of the waves from the source to the detector, and eventually the detections here on Earth. And for each of these components, I think we have some good effective theories that we can use to describe this part of the story. And this goes back to something Paolo said in terms of having different effective theories that we use for different jobs. And so, for instance, if you are interested in figuring out the effect that additional degrees of freedom could have in the spiral phase, you can work in a post-Newtonian limit and use some modified version of energy R that also includes additional degrees of freedom. In the ring down phase, you could work with an EFT of black hole perturbations. During the propagation phase, you can work with an EFT around flat space or the EFT of dark energy. And in each of these phases, using each of these field theories, a lot of work has been done to derive very interesting effects, some of which have been discussed today, for instance, by Lavinia or by Filippo. So one could have oscillations of gravitational waves into other degrees of freedom, or decay into dark energy, for example. And of course, in the production phase, additional degrees of freedom would modify the power emitted, give us new quasi-normal mode, and potentially additional polarization. It seems to me, though, that up until now, the community has focused on trying to derive these broad predictions, broad consequences, and we haven't paid too much attention to the fact that at the end, what the experimenters would like to have is a waveform that depends on some parameters, right? And so this has prompted the people from that came up with a few parameterized approaches that are experiment friendly, but are not necessarily directly connected to fundamental physics, as EFTs can be. And so I think a challenge for the community going forward is to try to glue together these different EFTs by performing some matching calculations and try to incorporate UV constraints and essentially create an EFT-based pipeline that can really give us a waveform that depends on parameters in effective Lagrangians. And I think, to conclude, it's good to keep in mind that to these days, the very detection of gravitational waves is based on the assumption that the GR works. So the waveforms that are used are deriving general relativity. And so it would be nice if the community could come together to improve on that. So let me stop here.
Thanks very much, Riccardo. So let me just go through. Paolo, do you want to add anything?
Let me skip this one.
You skip this one? Okay. Rachel?
I'll pass again, thanks.
All right. Tony?
I'm going to draw attention to one thing that connects us back to the first topic as well. And that's the idea that this can be used, these gravitational wave experiments can be used to test aspects of cosmological constant problem, actually. There's been some nice papers by Sasaki and Turning where they've been thinking about things like the effect of phase transitions inside neutron stars. Obviously, in a very dense region, interior of a neutron star, phase transitions will occur. And if you have a situation where maybe the vacuum energy is screened or not screened in some way, that can affect the overall properties of the neutron star, and that can leave a signature inside the signals of gravitational waves. I think it's a really exciting and interesting potential new direction to actually sort of experimentally probe something as theoretical, if you like, as the cosmological constant problem.
And the chances of it being detectable, is it something
not
that
crazy, I don't think. No, apparently there are.
Interesting. Well, Misao is a very smart guy, so.
No, Sasaki, C-S-A-K.
Oh, different Sasaki.
Yeah.
Wrong Sasaki. Oh, don't know that one. I'm sure they're smart. Anybody want to? Maybe it's late in the day. It's been a long day for everyone. I see no hands up. Anybody want to raise their hand? Comment on what Riccardo's proposal is, or are you all scared? Maybe the prospect of linking it too directly to data is a bit worrying. Okay. How about, can I just ask, given that we've maybe just got about 5 minutes, I think, if I've understood how we've got to finish by 6:30. What were your, I haven't asked the panel this, but I'd be intrigued on, as we're mainly theorists, so what's your view on the Hubble tension? Do you think it's something we should be spending quite as much time as we are trying to think up mechanisms to increase energy densities around the time of equality, or should we just wait until the two sets of experiments have really sorted out their systematics? So George Stathiou gave a talk just before Christmas, which I was listening to, and I'm sure he'll say the same, something similar on Thursday. He basically says CMB, at least with lambda CDM, works perfectly. And he's got very issues with calibration of Cepheid variables, which is, of course, is the supernovae results. But we're theorists. Where should we be in this?
My feeling is always that once they stop squabbling, it'll go away. But that's just a hunch, right? And so that's why I haven't jumped on the bandwagon just yet.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these sort of early dark energy scenarios, the challenge is to then get the fields that's causing this to decay rapidly. And
yes, exactly.
After it's over, I think that's the difficulty.
These fields want to scale. They want to track the matter.
Yeah, exactly.
So they don't decay rapidly enough generally. I've had a private message from Enrico telling me to shut up. So we are due to 6:30 is the very end. So I will, I think, close it now. So I guess on behalf of the panel, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the panel for
thank you, Ed,
putting the time in and over the last few days to think about this. I actually think it's worked pretty well. I've enjoyed it very much. And thanks everybody for staying here and being present, and to Enrico and David for inviting us all on, and well done. It's been a good first day. I look forward to tomorrow. There's 92 of you have stayed up, which is pretty impressive. So I don't know, I don't know, David or Enrico, what do I do? I mean,
I think Enrico's up there for us.
for sharing it, and thank you to all the panelists for giving us their views and ideas. I think that's very nice, and we covered quite some ground. And we're going to resume tomorrow at 1 o'clock, same time. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.